you succeed three out of 10 times in baseball, and you do that long enough, you're a very well remembered baseball player. And so ultimately it's about recognizing what the failure can do to inform you of how to succeed. And that's a skill that can translate from either one.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a ton of gold. I mean, people. I talk about this all the time on the podcast. I mean, really, everything kind of comes down to preparation in my mind, particularly, like, especially, I mean, everywhere in life, but I mean, especially if we're talking about sales or the business world, because I mean, if you can't control what somebody else is going to do, what somebody's going to say, what kind of questions they're going to ask, but you can control how much you have prepared and how much you have personally practiced, right? Like you were just saying with the
Absolutely.
baseball thing, like you can't control like what pitch you're going to get in a game, but you can control how many times you've taken, that fastball, that curveball, whatever the case might be. You can control those things to practice it and try to get it down to the point where, again, you are succeeding that 3 out of 10 times and you are a hugely remembered baseball player. Something I wanted to hit on was the value of experimentation. And I mean, I feel like you're kind of the perfect guy to talk to about this because you are experimenting all the time. Do you have any idea how many experiments you have run in your life?
Oh boy. Um, a lot.
Yeah.
Probably thousands, if not millions. I mean, because, I see experimentation as saying, what kind of bat do I like? What kind of, what's the grip, feel like? How do I time up a specific, pitcher or what's the adjustment that I need to make? Things like that sort. Like I had a batting cage in my backyard growing up, so that was a laboratory,
Yep.
I mean, for me. And I think that ultimately it was kind of like, you know, that cerebral thought process was always, you're always tinkering, right?
Hmm.
Not necessarily in a lab now. You don't change an experiment once it starts. Some experiments run several days. That's not right. You can't change that. That's not how this works. Now, ultimately, though, it's about yeah. I mean, to answer your question, millions of times, and I think that it's sometimes scary for folks. I've seen this in science a good amount too. It's sometimes scary to make those adjustments because you don't
Hmm.
know too much, you know. And I saw a lot of that at Berkeley. A lot of really smart folks that were really nervous about, they were waffling about experiments, and I'll keep it PG. But Teach would always say things like, "Just run the experiment,
Yep.
just do it." And ultimately, you're gonna have to do all of them. So you might as well figure out which one you want to do the most and just get going and execute. Because the faster you get feedback on a well executed experiment, irrespective of what it is in your life, if you're in business or you're in science or in baseball, whatever, you're going to know more information immediately, and that's information that will arm you with a better choice down the road, and your tree of options and your game theory will improve. You
Hmm.
know more faster. And it's not just to do it to go through the motions, but to execute it to the best of your ability and to find those answers faster is something that really is powerful. And there's a cycle time on that for certain people. And if you can decrease your cycle time by making yourself more focused and to just get going, you will ultimately be more successful and you'll have an edge on folks as a result.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you're saying. I mean, this is you're preaching to the choir here. Said this is what I say all the time with like folks on my show, but it's in the podcast in general with my coaching clients, everybody I'm talking to. Really, I mean, it comes down to just you know, I mean, I feel like don't let fear ultimately control you, right? Like let it like be afraid and do it anyway. And like I'm a big believer that I mean, obviously, you're very much a man of science, so you might disagree with me a little bit on this, but I see like if you run an experiment, right? Like in the business world, trying out some new verbiage in sales, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and you ultimately don't like you have the hypothesis, I think I'll get this result, and you ultimately are wrong, like it quote unquote fails. I don't really see that as a true failure because, like you said, it allows you to iterate again, and hopefully version 2 or whatever, version 10, 100, whatever, will be better. A quote comes to mind, one of my favorites, and I can never ever remember who said it, but it's pretty short. It's try, fail, try again, and fail better. I mean, how do you feel about all of that?
I totally agree. I would argue that that's ultimately important, as important in science as well. I think that um, being afraid of failure simply means, that you're not ready to run the experiment. And I think
Mm,
that if you're not ready to run the experiment, you have to ask yourself why, right? And
mm-hmm.
I think that, if you understand these principles right here and you get in the flow of doing this, it's not so much about being fearful because you're not going to lose if you've done this right and you've prepared the right way to get there, right? no one who's ready to run a great experiment ever feels nervous about this, outside of the fact that you might actually find out the hypothesis isn't what you want, but you can't control that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, if you're afraid of those things, then ask yourself why you consistently are doing that. And is it a reason that's founded in objective reality? Oftentimes it's kind of like, are you nervous because you don't feel confident for something else? Or is it something that's actually just holding you back based on the design, right? If you're afraid that someone's going to make fun of you or give you a hard time in business or whatever, then ultimately it's because it might not be the right investor, or it might not be the right person, or it might not be the right fit for you personally. And I think that you find out more about that the more you go out and try, right? So
Yes.
exactly who's going to be receptive to your brand of pitch or of business or science, and that's like, Tej, as an example. He's a specific type of scientist,
Mm.
and it's been said time and time again that he's intense, and he wants to be ultimately successful in science, and he wants his folks to do the best they can, because he wants them to get that excellence out of their work. And that can drive scientists away, and you know what, that's fine, right? But he's learned exactly which kind of scientists he wants to recruit as a result. So it's a perfect example of it. And it's like, the more you do this, the more you learn about yourself. And I think that Teach ultimately liked me as a baseball player, that could turn to science, because he knew that there was a lot of resilience there relative to failure, which inevitably is the case in business too. And so it's about learning how to just embrace the suck, if you will, right? I mean,
Yes.
understanding that's going to happen to everybody, and everybody's not going to feel 100% all the time. You could never feel 100% playing 40 games of
Mm.
baseball a year. You can never feel great in the lab every day, but no one's going to care when they look at the data, right? And no one's going to know in the background. And so it's kind of like, don't suppress your feelings, but also don't let your feelings control your decision making skills
Yes.
relative to the business, because objectivity is the place to be in business. If you let your ego and your emotions run your business, or run your focal points that you want to touch on, you're going to be ping ponged all around the place, and you're not going to really know, why you're not being successful. And it's ultimately because you're letting your external factors affect that. And I think that that's back to what you said a second ago, Jacob. It's focusing on, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. So you and I are on the same wavelength. Like the what I always kind of say, like the little glib saying that I always tell people is, like, feel the emotions, obviously, but emotions, feelings, they are indicators, not dictators, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, don't. I mean, it's like you were saying. Like, I mean, the gym is, I feel like, a really common example of this, where you wake up one day and you feel great about going to the gym, and so you go to the gym, and the next day you wake up, you don't feel like going to the gym, but you go to the gym anyway. And I think it comes down to, like, the stories that we're telling ourselves when it comes to this kind of motivation thing. And I think motivation is a feeling, but it's more a result. And it's like discipline, where, like, you don't remember that you didn't want to go to the gym yesterday in like a year, but you will notice that, oh, I feel better in a year, I look better in a year, I'm stronger, whatever the case might be. I love it.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I promised we were going to talk about science here and not just philosophy and baseball and all the good stuff.
No problem.
Um, so the place I want to start might be a little heavy here, but I want to talk about CRISPR-Cas9. So you know that I've got a very, very little bit of experience with this, kind of, sort of, not like you, obviously. But for just like the folks listening at home, that, I mean, most people have not heard of this to my knowledge, but what is CRISPR? Like, what does it do? Like, what is it?
So CRISPR originally, this is fun. So this is how Jennifer Doudna would tell you. She'd start from the beginning. She'd say, when we were doing this and we had this discovery of CRISPR technology, which is ultimately now a way of editing genes through a series of processes that were engineered through her lab and others.
Hmm.
When we first discovered it, was a primitive immune system in the bacteria.
Okay.
So simply put, this thing was a protein, a gene that turns into a protein that turns around and scans the cell, the bacterial cell in this case, for invaders. And these invaders are bacteriophages. So little bacteria get infected by even littler viruses. And these viruses are a problem because they can actually insert their DNA into the genome of the bacteria. And CRISPR has these specific sequences, kind of like a library of them in a specific place that in the bacterial chromosome, that it can use to detect whether or not there's an invader. And if it finds an invader, it is like a molecular scissor. So it'll
Mm.
go in and cut away the DNA and remove this sequence. And so what Jennifer and others, Emmanuel as well, what they figured out was that if you were able to use CRISPR the right way, you could actually program it to target other things other than these specific bacterial integrated viral sequences. And so they were figuring out that you could take this thing, this protein Cas9,
Mm-hmm.
and pair it with a programmed sequence that could target anything in any context. And in the human context, that means like in a cell, in a dish, you can take the Cas9, you can integrate the Cas9 into the cell with several different processes from
Mm-hmm.
molecular biology.